A choice between peace or war. Colombia's presidential election is heading to a runoff between left-wing candidate Iván Cepeda and far-right millionaire lawyer Abelardo de la Espriella. With the two candidates running neck and neck, voters face a stark choice between pursuing negotiations with armed groups and a tougher military-led security strategy. The campaign has been overshadowed by violence, including car bombings, drone attacks, and the assassination of a leading presidential contender. This has transformed the election into a referendum on security and the economy. No candidate is expected to secure an outright majority, and the second round vote on June 21st now looks a certainty. To get first impressions from on the ground, I'm joined by DW correspondent Felipe Abondano. Thanks for joining us, Felipe. Tell me,
hi, Kiefer, how are you?
Tell me, is this result a surprise for you?
Well, it was for everybody. We were expecting different numbers for this election, especially on the option of Paloma Valencia and Daniel Oviedo. They were scoring like 16% on the voting intention in polls, and now they received 7%. Iván Cepeda was in the range that the polls were showing us, in 40.9%, but Abelardo de la Espriella was in the polls around 20%, and now he had scored 43% of the votes. What we can understand from the ground is that people understand this election as the second run. So they decided to vote for Abelardo de la Espriella on the first option, and now we are not sure who is going to win in the second run.
Now, the election campaign was marred by violent incidents. Was today peaceful?
Yes, as you mentioned before, a month ago, we have several terrorist attacks, especially in Valle del Cauca. It's a region in Colombia that has been struggling in security. But today was a really calm election. All the poll voting positions were open, and people were able to vote in tranquility. What we are now expecting, as you mentioned also, is that people are voting because the security risk that Colombia are having at the moment.
So we're looking now at a runoff. What can we expect from the coming days and weeks?
Well, both candidates that are going to go in the second round of elections are going to try to find alliances. Abelardo de la Espriella comes from the ultra-right movement in Colombia, so he may have the votes of Paloma Valencia already secured. Iván Cepeda has to struggle a lot to get into the advance that they don't only have with Abelardo de la Espriella at this moment, but also the one that they will receive if Paloma Valencia adds to his campaign. So both of them will try to get alliances and try to motivate people that didn't vote today to do so in the next election. But what we can perceive is that the ultra-right movement is really strong, and they may win the second round of elections.
Right, so a busy couple of weeks ahead for you there, Felipe. DW correspondent Felipe Abondano, thank you for joining me tonight.
See you, Clifford. Thanks.
I want to zoom out now a bit to get a sense of the kind of choices facing Colombia's people. Elizabeth Dickinson knows a thing or two about that. She's Deputy Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Crisis Group, and she joins us from Bogota. Elizabeth, good to have you with us.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
So let's kick off, Elizabeth. Why do you think Colombia has seemed to stick to left-leaning governments while many other Latin American states are turning to the right?
Well, I think the fundamental context here really is that, as you said, Gustavo Petro, the outgoing president, was in fact the first elected left-leaning president in modern Colombia. And really, how we can explain that is looking back at Colombia's history. This was a country that was in a civil war really for 50 years, during which the priority and the only priority really was security and this fight for the existential existence of the state. What that meant is that a lot of grievances about poverty, inequality, the lack of opportunity sort of got swept aside for many decades. And what we've seen since a peace agreement in 2016 ended that conflict is that those grievances have risen to the surface. Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in Latin America, which is already the most unequal continent in the world. And I think that, finally we have a constituency that raises those concerns about the lack of social mobility and opportunity that has really brought the left into this political moment.
Right, and overshadowing this election is the question. It's a familiar one from Colombia, but it's once again become urgent of how to deal with illegal armed groups and drug traffickers. Elizabeth, give us a sense of how those decades of violence have shaped Colombia.
Well, exactly as you said, since this peace agreement that I mentioned, unfortunately, what we've seen is really a reconfiguration of Colombia's conflict. The idea of the peace agreement that was signed was that the state would be able to enter and fill the vacuums that were left behind by this former rebel group. Unfortunately, what we saw instead is that criminal actors were more agile and more apt at filling those spaces. Many of them included drug trafficking routes, illegal mining, and what we've seen is this growth of conflict in the years since. We now have in this campaign really diametrically opposed visions about how to confront that threat. On the one hand, on the political left, you have a candidate who promises continuity with a policy under the former and outgoing government of dialogue with armed and criminal groups, really looking to unwind these conflicts through negotiation. And on the other hand, particularly on the right, you really have an alignment, frankly, with Washington's line of a hard approach against these organizations through military force.
Right, and to focus in on the candidates, how does Cepeda say he'll tackle the latest surge in crime and violence?
Well, Iván Cepeda is a person who has really devoted his entire political career to the idea of peace and negotiation and has been a fundamental supporter of peace negotiations throughout the decades. This famous peace agreement in 2016 was just one of several that have been signed throughout Colombia's recent history. And Iván Cepeda believes that negotiation is the fundamental tool that will be needed to unwind conflict. I think that this comes in aligned with the continuation of the social policies of the outgoing government. Some of the reasons that conflict continues to recycle in Colombia is because of this lack of opportunity. We at Crisis Group, for example, have done a lot of work on recruitment, particularly of children and young people into these groups. And many of them join because they don't have enough to eat at home. They don't have opportunities outside of their neighborhoods. And armed and criminal groups are able to seduce them with the idea that they will be able to access social mobility that is so lacking in the legal economy.
So let's compare that with his rival, Abelardo de la Espriella, who just a few days ago told the Associated Press the following. He said, "The only peace process I believe in is one imposed by the force of arms and the laws of the Republic. Under my government, any bandit who resists will be eliminated as appropriate. And if he submits, we will imprison him in a mega prison so he can pay his debt to justice as they should." Now, these are strong words. How would you evaluate this?
Well, very much in line with exactly what he said. You can tell that de la Espriella draws his inspiration very much from leaders like Nayib Bukele from El Salvador, who has taken a very hard hand against armed and criminal groups. De la Espriella has promised to build large-scale prisons, to have zero tolerance, increasing the penalties for certain crimes, and, as you suggested, to ratchet up military pressure. I think in this there is something of a narrative that we're hearing during the election that will come face first with reality if he is the successful candidate for presidency and takes office in August. Colombia's military is in fact already operating on all cylinders against many of these organizations. There simply isn't a lot of capacity to ratchet up operations. There's no more flying hours, there's no more helicopters, there's no more soldiers to send out into the field. And so this idea that there is a quick win and a military solution, I think will come crashing into reality. In our view, probably somewhere between the two extremes is where we would need to land to really walk back Colombia's conflict. Of course, military pressure plays a role in pushing these groups and disarticulating them and going after some of the worst crimes. At the same time, negotiation remains the only way that Colombia has ever demobilized any serious armed or criminal group.
So do you think it's too dramatic to say that this is a choice between war and peace for the Colombian people?
It has been framed in that way. And again, as I said, I do believe that whoever takes office in August will quickly find themselves confronting a country that is slipping into a new cycle of conflict. And what we hope is that they will use a variety of tools addressing these root social causes, using negotiations when appropriate, and certainly continuing investigations, all of the judicial tools and certainly military pressure to confront these groups. This is simply not a problem that has one solution. election. And I think in many ways, the narrative of this election has been a bit misleading in that regard.
Right. And turning to external forces now, we've seen the US intervene in Venezuela, ratchet up pressure on Cuba, US strikes on drug boats. How much influence does growing US pressure have on Colombia?
Well, the U.S. has a very special role in Colombia. This is and has been for decades the United States' strongest military partner in South America, with the most capable military and very deep integration between the two countries on the defense and security side, but also economically. The United States is far and away the most important trading partner for Colombia. So as you can imagine, U.S. pressure has had an impact here and certainly has played into the way that people are thinking about voting. Regardless who triumphs, I think that Colombia will face increasing pressure to align with Washington's campaign against organized crime. I do think that the two candidates who have led in the ballots will take markedly different approaches in this regard as well.
Right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Elizabeth Dickinson from International Crisis Group, thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks to you.
So, in about 3 weeks, Colombia will have the choice between two candidates with very different ideas on how to end decades-long conflicts and violence. Peace negotiations or a tough crackdown? What do you think are the pros and cons of both policies? Let us know in the comments. And if you like this video, please hit that like button. And of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe.